Forecasting is a tool which uses historical data from the contact center solution to estimate the number of required agents should there be a change to your environment. For example, an expected increase in calls by 50% due to the Christmas period, or an increase in handling time due to a product fault. To access the forecasting tool, you'll need to have the appropriate levels of access. Speak to your system administrator if required. It is recommended to have at least 12 months of data if you are looking for a monthly forecast. The more historical data there is, the more reliable the calculations. Calculations are made using Erlang's calculation formula. You can use either the CCM web portal or you can use either the CCM web reporting portal or the contact center client application to run your forecast. Log into the CCM web reporting portal. Speak to your system administrator if you do not know the URL or your credentials. Select Reports in the top left-hand corner. Select Voice. Select Forecast Reports. From the Report Type drop-down, select whether you are forecasting on an individual queue or a queue group. Speak to your system administrator if you require certain queue groups to be created. Once the report type has been selected, select the particular queue or the queue group that you want to report on. Select the start date and end date of the historical data that you want to use. Select the start hour and end hour time periods that you want to report on. Select whether the report activity intervals will be in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or 60 minutes of the day. Select the days to include. Select your report language. Choose whether the report will be in Excel or a PDF format. Select the Filter tab in the top left of the report properties. Modify the necessary information required to base your forecast on. For example, you might aim for a service level objective of 90% in 1 minute. Modify the wrap-up timer or the work timer allowed at the end of your inbound queue calls. Agent efficiency should be modified to reflect a reasonable percentage based on the agent's availability to handle inbound queue calls. For example, an agent would be 80% efficient if 20% of their time is allocated to lunch, breaks, and duties that are not related to servicing inbound queue calls. Modify average talk time, calls offered, or weekly totals as required. For example, do you expect a change in the average talk time? Do you expect calls offered to increase or decrease? Do you expect your weekly totals to change? Select the Distribution tab in the top left-hand corner of the properties of the report. Choose where the forecast report should be emailed to. For contact groups, see the video in CCM Web Reports on how to create contact groups. For contacts, see the video in CCM Web Reports on how to create contacts within your account profile. Employee emails are only visible if their email addresses have been added into the back end of the system. Speak to your system administrator if required. You can choose to manually enter in email addresses separated by a comma if required. Select Submit to run the forecast report. Select View Report Inbox. Notice the status of the report. Orange means the data is pending. Grey means no data was available. Green means the report is ready and available for viewing. You can select the checkbox to automatically refresh the page every 10 seconds, or press refresh on your web browser and wait for the status to change. The more data there is, the longer it will take to complete the forecast. The status of whether the forecast was emailed successfully is indicated by the envelope icon. Select the View link to save and open up the report. Notice the details showing on the report. It shows how many manned agents you had, that is, the agents that are logged in, whether they are on calls, busy, or available. Based on the historical data, it will show how many agents were required, and based on the forecast information, how many are needed to meet the expected forecast. You can run the forecasting tool from the Contact Center client. In the Contact Center client, select Tools in the top ribbon. Select Forecasting. The forecaster will launch. If asked to, you may need to enter in your password. When the forecasting tool opens, select Load Historical Data in the top left-hand corner. Select either the queue or queue group that you want to forecast on. Speak to your system administrator if you need to have queue groups created. In the top right-hand corner, you can select a specific date or a date range to use as your historical data. Click Include Dates to include the specific date range. You could also select to exclude dates if you want to exclude particular dates from the forecast. For example, Easter or Christmas periods that may distort your data. Choose the start hour and end hour to forecast on. Choose the intervals that you want to view the data by, for example 15 minutes, 30 minutes or 60 minutes of the day. Select Submit. Update the voice service objectives as required. For example, what is your service level objective that you are aiming for? What is the wrap-up timer or work timer allowed at the end of an inbound queue call? Your agent efficiency should be modified to reflect a reasonable percentage based on the agent's availability to handle inbound queue calls. For example, they would be 80% efficient if 20% of their time is allocated for lunch, breaks, and duties that are not related to servicing inbound queue calls. Use the Modify button at the top to forecast based on specific changes. For example, changes to the average handling time, interactions offered, or weekly total. On choosing one of the forecasting options, you'll be asked to enter in the specific details. Select Apply once you have entered in your forecast details. Select Perform Forecast. Notice the details showing you historically how many agents were required, and based on the forecasting information, how many are needed to meet the expected forecast. Notice the various tabs for each day of the week. Select Reset to reset all parameters back to the original historical data that was loaded. Select Export Forecast to export the information to Excel.